This is the behind-the-scenes video about Death I Linger On from the debut album by my band, Black Halo. I'll be discussing everything about the writing, recording, and release of this song. This is the oldest song on the album. I wrote most of it when I was about 16, maybe 17. The exception is the chorus, which was added in 2012. And the reason I did that is that sometimes metal bands take chances with the song structure. So instead of just being like verse, chorus, and so on, we do weird things. And I grew up with metal bands, so doing weird things with structure was actually what was normal to me. And I had done it with this song as well. But I eventually realized it doesn't really work out as well as I thought it was at the time. I should probably fix this. So I removed one section and I added the chorus. Now the music that was removed, it's actually still in the song because it came up more than once. It's actually under the, not the opening, the last guitar solo, right when it starts. That music is what was removed from before, and the structure of the song is quite a bit different as well. But for the most part, it's in the same order. It's just that I pulled out that one section and I added that chorus. As far as the vocal melodies, the first verse, that has never changed. So that vocal melody was right there from the beginning. For the chorus, the vocal melody is actually following the rhythm guitar part a little bit, and that is where that came from. All of the lyrics were written when I was probably about 18. But all of those lyrics are gone except for the opening line. The song has always been called In Death I Linger On. I don't know how I thought of that phrase, but I always thought it was kind of a cool phrase. So the opening lyric is still the same, but the song has a very different meaning than originally. And in my defense, I was about 18 when I wrote the lyrics originally, and I write epic fantasy. So the original subject was, I didn't know what that line meant, that title. So what I came up with, as a guy who loves undead and writes epic fantasy, I had this whole weird storyline about a wizard having made someone be their undead servant who goes off and does this or that for them. So it was kind of silly. I always wanted to change it. I think it went from the opposite of being very silly to the opposite extreme of being a pretty serious song with lyrics that I think are some of the best I've ever written. Certainly the subject is one that's very sensitive compared to what it was before. So it's a little bit humorous to me that I went from one extreme to the other as far as the lyrics. The reason this song got added to the album about a year or two after most of it was recorded is that the first two singers were really opposed to doing a concept album. And a lot of the songs on the album, the lyrics that I had written suggested one, and I wanted to do it, but they didn't. So I just abandoned it and I didn't worry about it. But then they left. And the third singer, who ended up being the last singer, Chase Breedlove, he really liked the idea. And Chase has been the singer twice. First, he was the singer around 2012, 2013, and then he had to leave for personal reasons, and he eventually came back and finished the album. But one of the impacts that he had is he was the one who was like, yeah, okay, let's do this concept album that you have. So I added the song to be part of the storyline and to help flesh out that story. And in this case, I needed the woman in the story to have a problem that she has been through where she doesn't want to admit what she actually has experienced. And unfortunately, she chooses other ways to cope, and that leads to her unfortunate demise in the story of the album. And that in turn sends the main character off into a deeper spiral of his own depression and the resulting actions he takes. So I had some of the story before this and some of the story after this, and this was specifically written to fill the gap in a storyline. And I chose unwanted sexual attention when you are a minor, because that is exactly the kind of thing that will keep someone from admitting that it has happened to them. And it also seemed to fit with that title, In Death I Linger On. In this case, that's a metaphorical death. Now, this is a very sensitive subject to write a song about, and fortunately I've matured a lot over the years, and I felt like I was up to the challenge of writing lyrics that could gracefully deal with this subject. Now, a side effect of adding this song to the album is that the drummer and the bassist who had performed on most of this album had already done their parts and gone, and they were basically session musicians. And at the time, I was going to ask them to work on this and the other songs that I added, but I also knew that the album was still in flux, and maybe I should just wait. Well, by the time the album was actually done, after almost, it was probably 13 years before the performances were done, both of them had moved on to other things, so I ended up doing the bass guitar, and I ended up hiring Megadeth's drummer, Dirk Verbeuren, to do the drums on this, even though I had done a full workup on my electronic drum kit, but I just think it sounds better with live drums, and I wanted someone else's feel on the song. I also did all the string arrangements and the piano on this and the percussion, so pretty much everything but the vocals and the drums that you hear is me. This is also one of the songs where I am the sole writer, and I'll give you a little tip in how I handle things sometimes. As the guy behind Black Halo and the songwriter, and I am primarily a songwriter, even though I'm a guitarist as well, but my focus is always about composition. Sometimes I write something and I feel like it's going very well, like the lyrics for this. And at one point I was a little bit stuck on the third verse, and I felt so positive about the first two verses that I really didn't want to give this to someone else like Chase and say, hey, can you work on the third verse? Because admittedly, I wanted to be the only one who had worked on this because of the quality of what I had already done. And I didn't want someone else to get the credit for it. Maybe that's a little bit shallow or egotistical, but I felt like, I don't want someone to think the other person who worked on this is the one who wrote the really good lyrics. Now, you could disagree with me. You might think my lyrics are terrible, but this has happened more than once where I feel like I've got something really strong, but there are parts of it, lyrically or melodically, where I don't feel like it's where it's at. And I want to try to get it there myself because I know I'm capable of it, and I don't give it to another performer to help me finish it until I just can't do it. The first time Chase was the singer, he did a mock-up of the vocal lines on this song where he kind of did his impersonation of a woman, and it was a little bit funny. I don't think we'll ever have that see the light of day. When the album was being recorded, the song was being recorded for the album, the final vocals, I did have Chase do a full workup again of the vocals, this time not doing an imitation of a woman. It was always supposed to be sung by a woman, and that was only going to be true, though, if it was a concept album. But for a while there, it looked like it wouldn't be a concept album because I just couldn't get the vocals done. But when it started to really look like it was coming together, I thought, okay, even though Chase has sung this song for real, not the goofing around, acting like he's a girl kind of thing, I thought I want to actually hire a singer to do this. So that was when Beck Hallcraft came into the picture. Working with Beck was fun. I found her through a website called Air Gigs, and actually right now, if you go to that site, there are a half dozen performers whose pictures are listed on the front page of that, and hers was actually one of them. She gets a lot of business through there. She's an excellent singer. She agreed pretty quickly to work on this and was very complimentary about the treatment of the lyrics and the subject and the music. She ended up working on it 3 different times. This is true a lot of times when you work with someone, they'll give you an initial pass and ask you, what do you think? Am I on the right track? And so in the price that she was having me pay for her services, she included 3 different rounds on this. And we did end up using all 3 rounds. And I'll tell you what happened with these. The first performance she sent me had all of the vocals in a lower register of her voice. And I was a little bit surprised she had done that, partly because so many of her samples on Air Gigs, she was singing in a higher register, and that I really thought that was beautiful, and that was really what I wanted. So it surprised me, but at the same time, it sounded good. But I also thought I would like to hear this higher too, to see how it sounds that way. Now, if you're wondering what I mean by this, if you listen to the song now, most of the, if not all of the first verse is in that lower register, and that might be the first set of performances that she sent me. It does sound good. In the third verse, she also starts lower, and I'll tell you how this came about. But that first performance, everything was at a lower octave, and so I asked her to sing it again at a higher octave, and she sent me the whole song again that way. And you hear that higher register in each of the choruses. And that, as soon as I heard it, I thought that's exactly what I was hoping this was going to sound like with her voice and my guitar playing. And so I was really happy with this. It sounded great. But it also gave me an idea. And that idea was that I thought it would be good if she sang in different registers at different parts of the song. So what you end up hearing now is the lower vocals in the first verse, higher vocals in the first chorus, higher vocals in the second verse, and still higher vocals in the second chorus. Then the guitar solo comes, and the third verse, she starts lower and then goes higher the longer that verse goes on. And then again, the final verse, she's doing the higher vocals, the final chorus. So all 3 choruses are that higher vocal, and the first verse and part of the third one are the lower vocal. I did something known as comping, which is when you take like 2 MP3s, the first 2 she sent me, and I had them in the Pro Tools, so you see that behind me. I had them lined up in Pro Tools, and I basically edited together this version of the song, and I sent it to her, and I said, I have this idea for how we should put this whole thing together. And as soon as she heard it, she says, oh, I see what you're going for, and I agree. And she said, let me re-perform the third verse because she felt like it needed to be smoother going from the lower register to the higher than what we had, because it wasn't intended that way when she had sung it for me. So we got this done, and I thought it sounded great. One of the things I'll say is that in the very first performance, the end of the third verse, she sings a line where she says, you could have heard me cry. And I always left that as a shorter vocal. You know, if the lyric is normally that long, it's only like that long in that one. And I thought, hopefully the singer will do something to embellish that. And she sent me the embellishment that you hear there. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, yes, this is exactly the kind of thing that I was hoping she would do based on the performances and the sample clips that she had on there. And so I was really thrilled when she did that. Now, you know, there is a little bit more on the vocals in this song. At the end, as the guitar solo is starting to fade out, she starts to sing, "I Said No." This was not part of the original version back when I was 16, because her lyrics were completely different. It wasn't even part of the 2012 version. But in the years since 2012, I think she did the vocals around 2024. During the years in between, I sometimes would listen to this album to see what I thought of it. And I started to hear that part where she sings "I Said No" at the end, and I wanted it to start softly and get progressively louder. And the idea here was that sometimes people are afraid to admit to something they've been through, and so I wanted it to be like, okay, she finally whispers it, and then she says it a little stronger. Then, you know, her anguish is going up. She's finding strength in the objection to this having happened to her, and that's getting stronger and more tortured as she goes along. I was never sure if this would really work the way it does. I do think in the end it does work, but it was just an idea, and sometimes you're not sure if an idea is going to pan out as you expect it to. When she sent it to me, she sent me a whole bunch of different performances of her singing that at different pitches and different intensity levels, different volume, different quietness, and she didn't send them in the order that you hear them, but she sent me what I needed, and I basically rearranged those in Pro Tools to get the result that I wanted, and I think it did come together the right way. Now, I've mentioned this earlier version of the song. As it turns out, there is a studio performance of that. Way back in my late teens, I was in a band that was supposed to be Black Halo. It never really was Black Halo. I knew what I wanted to do, and the other people who joined that band, I think they essentially lied that they wanted to do the same thing, and then they kind of started pushing the band to be something other than what I wanted, and I wasn't happy with that. But there was a point where we went into a studio and we recorded this song along with Reality Distortion Fields and the song that is now called Darkness Rises, which is a bonus track. Both of those songs were changed, as well as this one. I don't intend to let that version of the song be heard. Sometimes if you join the newsletter, you can hear a demo of something. Right now, I'm still admittedly a little embarrassed by my lyrics, but the interesting thing about that is that the final guitar solo you hear on this album, that is actually from way back then, in my late teens. I learned it from that demo to re-perform it for the album. I will also say that the original version had no drums, it had no percussion, it didn't have the string arrangement or the piano. It was really nothing but my guitar, bass, and a singer, and it was originally sung by a man. For the drums on this, I did a full workup of this on my electronic drum set, and one of the things that was interesting to me is that when I first started playing along with the chorus, I could not figure out how to play drums to that. It seemed very natural when I wrote the guitar parts and everything else, and so I wasn't expecting it to be a little bit weird, and it kept throwing me off unless I started at the verse and I played through it, and I realized it was still basically 4/4 or common time, but it had a slightly odd feel to it when I played drums, and I ended up coming up with something that I thought worked, but I wasn't entirely sure. It took me longer to come up with a drum part for that than just about anything I've ever done. And when I hired Dirk Verbeuren to do the drums on this, I told him about this, and I said, you know, this is what I came up with. I think it works. Feel free to experiment with this and see if you find something that works a little better. But he ended up doing the same thing. I don't know if he did experiment and just didn't find something, or if he heard my reference drums and that got stuck in his head and was like, yeah, okay, that's how that goes. But that's still the way it is now. As for the release of this song, this was written long before streaming media like Spotify. And today there is an issue that songwriters and bands need to be aware of, and that is something called the skip rate. If a song is skipped before it gets to 30 seconds, that's essentially a strike against that song as far as Spotify is concerned, and they will essentially decide, okay, that person didn't like the song. So let's say 100 people hear the song and they all skip. That would be really bad, and it could essentially doom the song on a streaming platform. And what I mean is that Spotify will put songs out there, and they'll put it, like if you're listening and you don't know about the song, it could recommend that song to you, put it in front of you, if they think that people are liking it, like listening to it all the way through, saving it a lot, adding it to their playlists. But if people keep skipping it, Spotify decides nobody likes that song, so we're not going to recommend that to anybody. So I was aware of this, and I did think about removing the long intro that's on this, but I ultimately decided not to. And so far, the song seems to be doing well. so that's a relief. But this is something I don't like, the idea that streaming platforms can actually alter the way people write songs. And there have actually been articles written about this where a lot of people don't like this, but it is something we need to be aware of. If you're a guitarist, or if you would just like to see how the guitar parts are performed, I do have a guitar playthrough video that has been released, so you can watch that. I'll have it linked below this. And please give the song a listen. If it's something that you think would have a positive effect on a listener, someone who maybe has gone through this or knows someone who has, feel free to recommend the song to them. Something that I've been concerned about is whether or not a song should have a trigger warning. This could cause some people to experience some stress, and that was something that I was aware of when I wrote it, but I feel like as an artist, artists in general, we need to be able to tackle tough subjects. I'm just hoping that people don't find it offensive in any way. Please let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. And if you like the song or this video, please subscribe and like the video. And thank you for watching.